The dust cloud rose like a signal fire against the Nevada sky, and Grace Bellamy knew they were in serious trouble before the stagecoach lurched to a violent stop that nearly threw her from her seat. It was September of 1881, and Grace had been traveling for 3 weeks from Boston to San Francisco, where her Aunt Margaret supposedly ran a successful millinery shop. The journey had been long and uncomfortable, but nothing compared to the dread that filled her chest as she heard the driver cursing above and felt the coach list heavily to one side. The other passengers, a portly banker named Mr. Henderson and a preacher's wife called Mrs. Coulter, both looked equally alarmed as they steadied themselves against the walls. "Everyone out," the driver shouted. "Axles cracked clean through, and we are not going anywhere until it gets fixed." Grace gathered her skirts and climbed down from the coach, her boots sinking into the sandy soil. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, nothing but sagebrush and rocky outcroppings as far as she could see. The sun blazed overhead, already making her feel faint beneath her layers of traveling clothes. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete, was on his knees examining the damage with his younger partner, a man barely 20 who went by Dutch. "How bad is it?" Mr. Henderson asked, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Bad enough," Pete said grimly. "The axle is split, and we have got no way to fix it proper. We are about 15 miles from the nearest town, which is Virginia City. Dutch here can ride one of the horses back, but it will take him hours to get there and back with help." "Hours?" Mrs. Coulter looked like she might faint. In this heat, Grace felt her stomach drop. They had little water left, and the sun showed no mercy. She had heard stories about people dying in the desert, their bones picked clean by vultures. She pushed the thought away and tried to remain calm, though her hands trembled as she adjusted her bonnet. "Well, there is no use standing about," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Let us at least move into whatever shade we can find." They were just settling themselves against the shaded side of the coach when Grace heard the distinctive sound of hoofbeats. She turned, shielding her eyes against the glare, and saw a lone rider approaching from the west. Her heart quickened, both from hope and a flutter of fear. A lone man in this wilderness could be a savior or a threat, and there was no way to know which until he arrived. The rider drew closer, and Grace could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle atop a sturdy paint horse, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. He wore dusty trail clothes, a blue shirt faded nearly white, and a leather vest. As he neared, he slowed his horse to a walk, his posture relaxed but alert. "Looks like you folks have run into some trouble," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the still air. Pete stepped forward, one hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Broken axle. You would not happen to have the skills and tools to fix one, would you?" The rider swung down from his horse with easy grace, and Grace got her first good look at him. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was strong-featured, with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking gray-blue that seemed to take in everything at once. "Thomas Quinn," he said, extending his hand to Pete, "and I have fixed a thing or two in my time. Let me take a look." Grace watched as Thomas knelt beside the broken axle, running his hands over the wood with a practiced touch. His fingers were long and capable, scarred in places but steady. He studied the damage for a long moment, then stood and walked back to his horse, rummaging through his saddlebags. "The wood is split, but it has not sheared completely through," he said, pulling out various items. "If I can reinforce it with some splinting and good strong rope, It might hold long enough to get you to Virginia City. It will not be pretty, and you will need to go slow, but it beats waiting out here all day." "Can you really do it?" Mrs. Coulter asked hopefully. Thomas glanced at her and nodded, then his eyes moved to Grace. Their gazes met for just a moment, and Grace felt something shift in her chest, a sudden awareness that made her breath catch. She looked away quickly, feeling heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun. "I can try, madam," he said. "No promises, but I would rather see you folks safe than leave you stranded." He set to work with quiet efficiency, and Grace found herself unable to look away. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, measuring and cutting pieces of wood from a fallen branch Dutch had retrieved. His hands worked steadily, wrapping and securing the makeshift splint around the damaged axle. Sweat darkened his shirt, and he paused occasionally to wipe his forehead with his sleeve, but he never complained or showed signs of giving up. "You are very skilled," Grace said, surprising herself by speaking. She had moved closer without quite realizing it, drawn by curiosity and something else she could not name. Thomas looked up at her, and a slow smile crossed his face. "My father was a wheelwright back in Missouri. I grew up learning how to fix just about anything with wheels. Never thought those skills would come in handy quite like this, though. We are very fortunate you came along," she said. "I am Grace Bellamy. Pleased to meet you, Miss Bellamy." He touched the brim of his hat with one dusty hand, though I wish it were under better circumstances. "Are you headed somewhere particular, Mr. Quinn?" "Just Thomas is fine," he said, returning his attention to his work. "And yes, I am heading west. Looking for work, maybe a place to settle. Been drifting for a while now. What kind of work do you do?" "Whatever needs doing." "I have cowboyed, worked as a ranch hand, done some carpentry, even tried my hand at prospecting for a spell. That last one did not pan out, if you will pardon the expression." Grace smiled despite herself. "And now you wander, for now." He secured another length of rope, testing its tightness. "I figure the right opportunity will present itself eventually. Just have to keep my eyes open." They fell into a comfortable silence as Thomas continued working. Grace knew she should return to the shade with the others, but something kept her there, watching his steady hands and listening to the quiet sound of his breathing. She studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed in concentration. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, a steadiness that made her feel safe despite the uncertainty of their situation. After nearly 2 hours of work, Thomas finally stood and wiped his hands on his pants. "That should hold," he announced. "But like I said, you need to take it slow and easy. Any hard bumps or fast turns could break it again, and next time there might not be someone around to fix it." Pete examined the repair work and nodded approvingly. "Fine work, young man. What do we owe you?" Thomas shook his head. "Nothing. Just help the next person you see in trouble, and we will call it even." "That is very generous," Mr. Henderson said, reaching into his coat. "But surely we can offer you something for your time and effort." "I appreciate it, but no thank you," Thomas said firmly. "I have got what I need." Grace felt a strange pang at the thought of him riding away. In just a few hours, this stranger had appeared, saved them from a potentially deadly situation, and now he would disappear back into the vast landscape as suddenly as he had arrived. The thought bothered her more than it should have. They all climbed back into the coach, and Pete started the horses moving at a careful walk. Thomas had mounted his paint horse and tipped his hat to them as they prepared to leave. Grace leaned out the window, unable to stop herself. "Will you be all right out here alone?" she called to him. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. "I have been alone out here for months, Miss Bellamy. I expect I will manage just fine." "Thank you again," she said, "for everything." "Safe travels," he replied. As the coach lurched into motion, Grace kept her eyes on Thomas until he was nothing but a distant figure against the horizon. Something in her chest ached with an unfamiliar longing, and she pressed her hand against her heart, confused by the intensity of the feeling. They made it to Virginia City by early evening, the makeshift repair holding better than anyone had expected. The town was bustling with activity, miners and merchants crowding the streets. They stopped at the stage station, where Pete arranged for a proper repair before the final leg of their journey. Grace stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk, stretching her cramped muscles and breathing in the cooler evening air. "We will be here overnight," Pete announced. "Stage will not be ready until morning at the earliest. There is a decent hotel just up the street, the Silver Dollar. I suggest you all get rooms and a hot meal." Grace checked into the hotel and was shown to a small but clean room on the second floor. She washed away the dust of travel and changed into a fresh dress, though her thoughts kept drifting to gray-blue eyes and capable hands. She told herself she was being foolish, that she had just been frightened and Thomas had appeared like some hero from a dime novel. It was natural to feel grateful and perhaps a bit infatuated, but it meant nothing. She would likely never see him again. The dining room was crowded, but she found a small table near the window and ordered a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables. She was halfway through her dinner when she heard a familiar voice at the front desk. "Just need a room for the night and a place to stable my horse." Grace's heart leaped. She turned in her seat and saw Thomas standing at the desk, his saddlebag slung over one shoulder. Without thinking, she stood and walked toward him. "Mr. Quinn," he turned, surprise and pleasure crossing his face in quick succession. "Miss Bellamy, I did not expect to see you again so soon." "I could say the same. Are you staying here? Seems so." "This is the only hotel in town with vacancies. Small world, I suppose. Have you eaten?" The words were out before she could stop them, and she felt her cheeks warm. "I mean, I am just sitting down to dinner, and it seems silly for us both to eat alone when we are acquaintances already." Thomas hesitated, and for a moment she thought he would refuse. Then that slow smile spread across his face again. "That would be nice, Miss Bellamy. Thank you." They settled at her table, and Thomas ordered his own meal. The initial awkwardness faded quickly as they began to talk. Grace learned that he had indeed grown up in Missouri, the son of a wheelwright and a schoolteacher. He had come west 3 years ago after his parents died within months of each other, looking for a fresh start and new opportunities. "I thought about heading to California, maybe trying the gold fields," he said, cutting into his steak. "But by the time I got out here, most of the easy gold was long gone. So I have just been working my way across, doing odd jobs, seeing the country." "Do you miss Missouri?" Grace asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Mostly I miss my parents, but the land itself, not particularly. It always felt too settled, too tame. Out here there is still room to breathe, you know, still possibilities." "I think I understand," Grace said slowly. "I have lived my whole life in Boston, and sometimes the city feels like it is closing in on me. So many rules, so many expectations. Women especially are supposed to fit into such narrow boxes." "Is that why you are heading to San Francisco?" She nodded. "My aunt runs a millinery shop there. She never married, built her own business, lives life on her own terms. My parents think I am going there to learn a respectable trade before finding a suitable husband. But really, I am hoping to learn how to be more like her. Independent." Thomas regarded her thoughtfully. "Takes courage to strike out on your own like that." "Or desperation," Grace said with a small laugh. "Sometimes I cannot tell which." "Maybe it is both," he said. "Most brave things are." They talked long after their meals were finished, until the dining room began to empty, and the proprietor started giving them pointed looks. Grace could not remember the last time she had felt so comfortable talking to someone, especially a man. Thomas listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and shared his own experiences with an honesty that surprised her. There was no pretense to him, no attempt to impress or manipulate. He was simply himself, and she found that incredibly refreshing. Finally, reluctantly, they made their way upstairs. Thomas's room was at the opposite end of the hall from hers, and they paused awkwardly at the landing. "Thank you for the company," Thomas said. "I enjoyed it very much." "As did I," Grace replied. She hesitated, then added, "Where will you go tomorrow?" "West, like I said. I heard there might be ranch work down near Carson City. Figured I would head that direction and see what turns up." "The stage goes through Carson City," Grace said, her heart beating faster. "Or near it, anyway." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Thomas cleared his throat. "Well then, I suppose we might cross paths again on the road." "I suppose we might. Good night, Miss Bellamy." "Good night, Mr. Quinn, and please call me Grace," he smiled. "Only if you call me Thomas." "Deal." Grace lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the tumult of emotions inside her. She barely knew this man, had spent perhaps a total of 6 hours in his company, yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. It was more than just his handsome face or his quiet competence. There was a goodness in him, a fundamental decency that shone through everything he did. The next morning, Grace woke early and dressed carefully, choosing a traveling dress in deep green that she knew complemented her brown eyes and auburn hair. She told herself she was not trying to look nice for anyone in particular, but she knew it was a lie. In the dining room, she found Thomas already seated, working his way through a plate of eggs and bacon. He stood when he saw her, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Figured we could share breakfast too, if you do not mind," he said. "Not at all," Grace said, unable to keep the smile from her face. Pete came in as they were finishing their meal, announcing that the stage was repaired and ready to leave within the hour. Grace felt a sinking disappointment, knowing that this meant saying goodbye to Thomas again. But as they gathered their belongings and made their way to the stage station, she saw Thomas leading his horse in the same direction. "You are coming with us?" she asked, hope rising in her chest. "Well, I am heading west anyway," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Seems foolish not to follow the road, and the stage route is the most direct path. I will just ride alongside for a while, at least until our paths diverge." Grace's smile felt like it might split her face. "That makes perfect sense." They set off in the cool morning air, the repaired stage rolling smoothly along the well-worn road. Thomas rode beside them on his paint horse, sometimes drawing close to the window where Grace sat, other times ranging ahead to scout the road. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a quick meal, and Thomas helped the ladies down from the coach with effortless courtesy. "Your cowboy seems quite taken with you," Mrs. Coulter whispered to Grace as they stretched their legs. "He is not my cowboy," Grace protested, but she could not help glancing over at where Thomas was checking his horse's hooves. "Not yet, perhaps," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "But mark my words, that young man did not decide to follow this stage out of a simple desire for company on the road." Grace wanted to dismiss the comment, but her heart soared at the possibility. Could Thomas really be interested in her as more than just a pleasant traveling companion? She caught him looking at her several times that afternoon, and each time their eyes met, she felt that same electric connection. They reached Carson City 3 days later, and Grace's heart sank as they pulled into the stage station. This was where Thomas had said he was looking for work. This was where they would part ways, and she would continue on to California while he stayed behind. The thought was almost unbearable. Thomas dismounted and helped her down from the coach, his hands steady at her waist. They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to let go. "I suppose this is where we say goodbye," she said softly. "Grace, I have been thinking," Thomas started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "That is, I mean to say, these past few days have been about the best I can remember in a long while." "For me too," she admitted. "And I know this is forward and maybe foolish, but I was wondering if you would mind if I continued traveling with the stage for a bit longer. I know I said I was looking for work here, but the truth is, there is work everywhere out west, and I find I am not quite ready to say goodbye yet." Grace's heart soared. "I would like that very much." "Yeah." His face lit up with a smile that made her knees weak. "Yes," she said firmly, "very much." They continued west together, falling into an easy rhythm. Each day brought them closer to California, and each day Grace felt herself falling deeper and deeper in love with Thomas Quinn. They talked about everything and nothing, shared stories and dreams, and slowly began to weave their lives together in small but meaningful ways. One evening they stopped at a way station in the foothills, a rough collection of buildings that offered basic shelter and food. After dinner, Thomas asked if Grace would like to take a walk, and she agreed immediately. They strolled away from the buildings, following a small creek that burbled over smooth stones. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said after they had walked in comfortable silence for a while. "Of course. Why did you really leave Boston?" "I mean, I know what you said about your aunt and wanting independence, but there is more to it, is there not?" Grace was quiet for a moment, surprised by his perceptiveness. "There was a man," she finally said. "Robert Carlyle. Wealthy, well-connected, exactly the sort my parents wanted me to marry. He courted me for 6 months, very properly, very correctly. Everyone said I should feel fortunate to have caught his attention." "But you did not love him," Thomas said softly. "I did not even like him very much," Grace admitted. "He was cold and controlling, always making little comments about what I should wear or how I should behave. He made it clear that once we were married, I would be expected to give up any interests or ambitions of my own and focus entirely on being his wife and eventually the mother of his children. When I tried to refuse his proposal, my father was furious. He said I was being childish and ungrateful. So I wrote to my aunt, and she invited me to come stay with her. I left before Robert could propose formally, before my father could accept on my behalf. That was brave," Thomas said. "It felt like running away. Sometimes running away is the bravest thing you can do." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Grace, I need to tell you something. I did not keep riding west because of a vague desire for company. I kept riding because I could not bear the thought of never seeing you again. These weeks we have been traveling together have been the happiest of my life, and I think I am falling in love with you." Grace's breath caught. The words she had been hoping to hear, afraid to hope for, hung in the air between them. "Thomas, I have been falling in love with you since the moment you knelt down to fix that axle. Maybe even before that, when I first saw you riding toward us. I know it is fast and maybe reckless, but I have never been more sure of anything." He stepped closer, reaching up to cup her face gently in his work-roughened hands. "May I kiss you, please?" she whispered. His lips met hers softly at first, tentatively, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Grace pressed closer, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, and Grace felt like she was falling and flying all at once, every nerve in her body alive with sensation. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I know I do not have much to offer you," he said quietly. "No land, no real prospects, just a horse and what I can earn with my 2 hands. But I swear to you, Grace, if you will have me, I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "I do not need land or prospects," Grace said. "I just need you." They stood there in the gathering twilight, holding each other, making promises and dreaming of the future. When they finally returned to the way station, Grace felt like she was walking on air. The next morning, Thomas surprised her by presenting her with a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked at dawn. She pressed one of the blooms into her journal, wanting to keep this moment forever. As they traveled on, their relationship deepened. They talked about what they wanted from life, where they might settle, what kind of future they could build together. Thomas admitted that he had always dreamed of having his own ranch someday, nothing huge, just enough land to run some cattle and horses, build a home. "I want a place where I can put down roots," he said. "Somewhere that is ours, that we build together. I want children someday too, if you do. A family." "I want all of that," Grace said, "but I also want to be more than just a wife and mother. I want to contribute, to have my own purpose." "I would never want you to be less than who you are," Thomas assured her. "Whatever dreams you have, we will find a way to make them happen together." They reached the California border in early October, the landscape changing as they climbed into the Sierra Nevada mountains. The air grew cooler and crisper, and Grace could see her breath in the mornings. Thomas bought a warmer coat for her at one of the stations, insisting even when she protested that she could buy her own. "Let me take care of you," he said simply. "I know you can take care of yourself, and I admire that about you, but sometimes letting someone help is not weakness. It is partnership." Grace had never thought of it that way before, and the insight made her love him even more. One afternoon, as they were winding through a particularly narrow mountain pass, the stage hit a large rock and lurched violently. Grace was thrown against the side of the coach, crying out in pain as her shoulder struck the wooden frame. Thomas, who had been riding just ahead, wheeled his horse around immediately. "Stop the coach," he shouted to Pete. He was at the door before they had fully stopped, his face pale with concern. "Grace, are you hurt?" "Just bruised, I think," she said, but when she tried to move her left arm, she gasped at the sharp pain. Thomas helped her down carefully and examined her shoulder with gentle hands. "I do not think anything is broken, but you have taken a nasty knock. You need to rest and let it heal properly." "I will be fine," Grace insisted, but her face was white with pain. "There is a town called Auburn about 10 miles ahead," Pete said. "It has got a doctor and a decent hotel. We can stop there for a day or two. Let the lady rest up." Grace wanted to protest that she did not want to delay everyone else's journey, but the pain in her shoulder was intense, and she knew she needed to be practical. Thomas stayed close beside her for the rest of the ride, one hand reaching through the window to hold hers. Auburn was a bustling mining town, larger than Grace had expected. The doctor, a middle-aged man named Dr. Richards, confirmed that nothing was broken but prescribed rest and warm compresses for the deep bruising. Thomas secured 2 rooms at the hotel, one for Grace and one for himself, though Grace noticed that his was right next door to hers. That evening, after the pain had subsided to a dull ache thanks to the doctor's willow bark tea, Thomas brought dinner up to her room. They ate together, talking quietly, and Grace felt a deep contentment despite the discomfort of her injury. "You did not have to stay," she said. "You could have ridden on ahead, found that work you have been looking for." "Grace, there is nowhere I would rather be than right here with you," Thomas said seriously. "You are the only work I am interested in right now. That is, I mean, making sure you are safe and cared for." "I am very lucky to have found you," she said softly. "I am the lucky one," he replied, reaching across to take her good hand in both of his. "Grace, I know we have not known each other long by most standards, but out here time moves differently. The connections we make are faster, deeper, because we all know how fragile life can be, and I do not want to waste a single moment of the time we have." "What are you saying?" Thomas slid off his chair and knelt beside the bed, still holding her hand. Grace's heart began to race. "I am saying that I love you, Grace Bellamy. I love your courage and your independence, your kindness and your strength. I love the way you laugh and the way you think, the way you are not afraid to speak your mind even when it is not what people want to hear. I know I do not have much to offer you yet, but I am a hard worker, and I will build us a good life. Will you marry me, Grace? Will you let me be your partner, your equal, your husband for the rest of our lives?" Tears streamed down Grace's face as she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you. I love you so much." He stood and leaned down to kiss her, careful not to jostle her injured shoulder. When they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing and crying at once. "I will get you a ring," Thomas promised, "a proper one as soon as I can save up enough." "I do not need a ring," Grace said. "I just need you." "You will have both," he said firmly. "You deserve the world, and I intend to give you as much of it as I can." They spent the next 2 days in Auburn, and Thomas barely left Grace's side. He brought her meals, read to her from the newspapers, and sat with her for hours just talking and dreaming of their future together. Grace had never felt so cherished, so valued for who she truly was. On the 3rd day, when the doctor pronounced her well enough to travel, they rejoined the stage for the final leg of the journey to San Francisco. Grace sent a telegram ahead to her Aunt Margaret, explaining that she would be arriving with her fiancé. The word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. They reached San Francisco in mid-October of 1881, and Grace's first glimpse of the city took her breath away. It sprawled across hills that rose sharply from the bay, buildings packed tightly together, church spires reaching toward the sky. The streets bustled with activity, a mix of cultures and languages that made Boston seem homogeneous by comparison. Aunt Margaret met them at the stage depot, and Grace knew her immediately from the photographs she had sent over the years. She was tall and elegant in her mid-40s, with the same auburn hair Grace had, though hers was liberally streaked with gray. She wore a practical but well-tailored suit, and her eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Grace," she exclaimed, pulling her niece into a tight embrace. "Oh, let me look at you. My goodness, you have grown into a beautiful woman." "Aunt Margaret, this is Thomas Quinn," Grace said, her hand finding his naturally. "My fiancé." Margaret's eyebrows rose sharply. "Your fiancé? That is quite a development." "Your last letter mentioned nothing about any engagement." "It is recent," Grace admitted. "Very recent. But I love him, Aunt Margaret, and he loves me. We want to build a life together." Margaret looked at Thomas appraisingly, and Grace held her breath. Her aunt's opinion mattered to her more than she had realized. After a long moment, Margaret extended her hand. "Any man who can convince my independent niece to get married must be quite something," she said. "Welcome, Mr. Quinn." "Thomas, please," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "And I know this must be a surprise, madam, but I promise you, I will take good care of her. I will spend my life making sure she is happy and safe." "I am more concerned with whether you will let her be herself," Margaret said bluntly. "Grace has never fit into the mold society wants to force women into. If you try to change that about her, we will have problems." "I would not dream of trying to change anything about her," Thomas said sincerely. "She is perfect exactly as she is." Margaret smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Good answer. Now come along, both of you. I have a spare room where Grace can stay, and we will find you lodgings nearby, Thomas. Then you can tell me this whole story properly." Over dinner that evening in Margaret's comfortable apartment above her millinery shop, Grace and Thomas recounted the story of how they met, leaving out nothing. Margaret listened intently, occasionally asking questions, her sharp eyes moving between them. "You have been very lucky," she said when they finished. "Both in finding each other and in that Thomas was able to fix that axle. The desert is not forgiving to those who get stranded." "I know," Grace said soberly. "If Thomas had not come along when he did, I do not know what would have happened to us." "It was not luck," Thomas said quietly. "It was fate. I was supposed to be there that day. I was supposed to meet Grace." Margaret looked at him thoughtfully. "You are a romantic, Mr. Quinn." "I am when it comes to Grace," he said simply. Over the following weeks, Thomas found work at a shipping company on the docks, loading and unloading cargo. It was hard physical labor, but it paid reasonably well, and he was saving every penny he could toward their future. Grace began working with her aunt, learning the millinery trade, but she also started writing articles about life in the West, drawing on her journey from Nevada. To her delight and surprise, several local newspapers agreed to publish her work. "You have a real talent for this," Margaret said, reading one of Grace's pieces about the challenges women face traveling alone. "You should keep writing, maybe even publish a book someday." "Do you really think so?" Grace asked, hope and doubt warring in her chest. "I do," Margaret said firmly. "You have lived an interesting life, and you tell stories well. There is an audience for this kind of writing." Thomas was equally supportive when Grace showed him her published articles. "I am so proud of you," he said, pulling her close. "Look at you making a name for yourself." "It is just a few articles," Grace said modestly. "It is the beginning," Thomas insisted. "And I meant what I said back on the trail. Whatever dreams you have, I will help you achieve them." They married on a cool December morning in a small church on Nob Hill, with Margaret standing as Grace's witness and another dock worker named Jim standing for Thomas. Grace wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with a small wreath of flowers in her hair. Thomas wore his best suit, purchased with his savings, and when he saw Grace walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. "You are so beautiful," he whispered as she reached his side. "You are not so bad yourself," she whispered back, making him laugh. They spoke their vows in steady, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other, to be partners and equals, to face whatever life brought them together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. They could not afford a fancy honeymoon, but Thomas had saved enough for 2 nights at a nice hotel. Those 2 days felt like a dream to Grace, a bubble of happiness where nothing existed but the two of them. They made love for the first time on their wedding night, and Grace marveled at how natural it felt, how right. Thomas was gentle and patient, clearly putting her comfort above his own pleasure, and by the second night, Grace felt confident and bold in ways she had never imagined. "I love you," she said, lying in his arms as dawn light filtered through the windows. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Why does it frighten you?" Thomas asked, his hand stroking her hair. "Because now I have something to lose," she admitted. "Before I met you, I was alone, and that was fine. Safe. But now the thought of losing you, of anything happening to you, is unbearable." "Nothing is going to happen to me," Thomas said. "I am going to be right here beside you for the next 60 years, annoying you with my bad jokes and my snoring." "You do not snore," Grace said with a laugh. "Give me time," he teased. They moved into a small apartment near the docks, just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. Grace continued working with her aunt and writing her articles, while Thomas worked at the docks and took odd jobs on the side, slowly building their savings. Their life was simple but happy, filled with small moments of joy, shared meals, and quiet evenings reading aloud to each other. In February of 1882, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor confirmed it, she felt a complex mix of emotions, excitement and fear and wonder all at once. She told Thomas that evening over dinner, simply putting the doctor's note in front of his plate. He read it twice, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and then pure joy. "Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, tears streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" Thomas came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. Grace, you have made me the happiest man alive. A baby, our baby." They held each other for a long time, both crying and laughing at once. That night, Thomas placed his hand on Grace's still flat stomach and talked to their unborn child, telling them about all the adventures they would have together, all the things he would teach them. The pregnancy was not easy. Grace suffered from severe morning sickness for the first 3 months, and Margaret insisted she stop working at the shop and focus on resting. Grace chafed at the inactivity, but she had to admit she did not have the energy for much beyond writing. She continued her articles, now focusing on motherhood and women's health issues, and her readership grew steadily. Thomas was attentive and devoted, coming home each evening with his pockets full of little treats he had bought for her, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her swollen feet. As her belly grew, he would talk to the baby constantly, singing silly songs and making up elaborate stories. "You are going to be such a wonderful father," Grace said one evening, watching him with tears in her eyes. "I had good examples," he said. "My parents loved each other deeply, and they loved me. I want to give our child that same kind of love and security." Their son was born in October of 1882, exactly 1 year after they had arrived in San Francisco. The labor was long and difficult, nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Grace thought she could not endure another second. But Thomas never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, encouraging her through every contraction. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and screaming, Thomas cut the cord with shaking hands. The doctor placed the baby on Grace's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face with wonder. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." "He is perfect," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face. "Grace, you did so well. I am so proud of you." They named him William Thomas Quinn after Thomas's father, and the baby was indeed perfect. He had Thomas's blue-gray eyes and Grace's dark hair, and he stared at the world with a solemn, considering expression that made them both laugh. Those first weeks with William were exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely magical. Grace had never known she could feel love so intense it physically hurt. Watching Thomas with their son, seeing the gentleness and patience he showed, made her fall in love with him all over again. "I never imagined this," she said one night as they lay in bed, William asleep in his cradle beside them. "Never imagined being this happy." "Me either," Thomas admitted. "I used to think happiness was something other people had that I would just keep drifting forever. But then I found you, and everything changed." "We found each other," Grace corrected. By the time William was 6 months old, Thomas had saved enough money to start seriously looking for land. They spent their weekends riding out into the countryside around San Francisco, looking for the perfect spot to build their future. They found it in the spring of 1883, a beautiful piece of land in the valley about 30 miles south of the city. It was not huge, just 40 acres, but it had good water, flat land for farming or ranching, and a small rise where they could build a house with a view of the valley. Thomas bought the land with their combined savings, and they broke ground on a house in May. Thomas did most of the construction himself, with help from some friends he had made at the docks. Grace helped when she could, though mostly she focused on caring for William and continuing her writing, which was now bringing in a steady income. The house took 6 months to build, but when it was finished, it was everything they had dreamed of. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a front porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Thomas built Grace a small office where she could write, with large windows that looked out over the valley. They moved in just before William's first birthday, and Grace cried as Thomas carried her over the threshold of their own home, built with their own hands on their own land. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Thomas said, kissing her softly. "Home," Grace repeated, the word feeling perfect on her tongue. They settled into their new life with joy. Thomas started building his herd, buying cattle and horses slowly, carefully, only what they could afford. Grace continued writing, now working on a book about her journey west and the women she had met along the way. William grew into a bright, curious toddler, always following his father around, trying to help with the ranch work. In the evenings, after William was in bed, Grace and Thomas would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the valley. Sometimes they talked, making plans and sharing dreams. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, content in each other's presence. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked one evening. "Leaving Boston, giving up the life you could have had there?" "Not for one single second," Grace said firmly. "That was not my life, Thomas. This is my life. You, William, this ranch, my writing. Everything I dreamed of but never thought I could have." "I am glad that Stagecoach broke down," Thomas said with a smile. "So am I," Grace agreed. "Best breakdown ever." In 1885, Grace gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Eleanor Margaret Quinn, after Grace's aunt. Eleanor was as different from William as 2 children could be, with Thomas's dark hair but Grace's brown eyes, and a personality that was fierce and independent from birth. "She is going to be a handful," Margaret said, visiting to meet her namesake. "Just like her mother." "I hope so," Grace said, looking down at her tiny daughter. "I hope she grows up knowing she can do anything she sets her mind to." As the years passed, their ranch prospered. Thomas proved to be not just a hard worker but a shrewd businessman, slowly expanding their herd and their land. Grace's book was published in 1887 and became a modest success, leading to requests for more writing and even some speaking engagements. William grew into a thoughtful, gentle boy who loved reading and helping his father with the animals. Eleanor was indeed a handful, always getting into mischief, always asking questions, never content to sit still. They added 2 more children to their family over the years, another son named Henry in 1888, and finally a daughter named Rose in 1891. Through all of it, through the busy days and sleepless nights, the struggles and triumphs, Grace and Thomas remained deeply in love. They still made time for each other, still talked for hours, still stole kisses when the children were not looking. "How do you do it?" Margaret asked during one visit, watching Thomas and Grace work together in the kitchen, moving around each other with practiced ease. "You have been married over 10 years, and you still look at each other like newlyweds." "I choose him," Grace said simply. "Every single day I wake up and choose to love him, choose to be his partner, choose to build this life together. And he does the same for me." "It is not always easy," Thomas added, overhearing. "We disagree sometimes, get frustrated with each other, but we talk things through. We remember that we are on the same team, working toward the same goals." "You were very lucky to find each other," Margaret said. "We were," Grace agreed, smiling at Thomas. "But we also worked hard to build what we have. Love is not just a feeling, it is a choice and a commitment." As the children grew older, Grace told them the story of how she and their father had met, about the broken stagecoach and the cowboy who had stopped to help. The children loved the story, begging to hear it over and over. "You were not scared?" Alina asked when she was 8, her eyes wide. "All alone in the desert, I was terrified," Grace admitted. "But then your father rode up, and somehow I knew everything would be all right." "That is because Papa can fix anything," William said confidently. He was 12 now, tall and gangly, starting to look more like a young man than a boy. "He certainly fixed that stagecoach," Grace said with a smile. "And he fixed your heart too," Alina said, making both her parents laugh. "Yes," Grace agreed, reaching for Thomas's hand. "He definitely did that." In 1895, when William was 13 and showing a keen interest in engineering, Thomas arranged for him to apprentice with a machinist in San Francisco. It was hard to see their oldest child start to spread his wings, but both Grace and Thomas knew it was important to support his dreams. "It is what you always said," Thomas reminded Grace when she cried after dropping William off at his apprenticeship. "Children should be free to chase their own dreams, not forced into boxes." "I know," Grace said, wiping her eyes, "but that does not make it easier." "No," Thomas agreed, pulling her close, "but we will get through it together, just like we get through everything else." The turn of the century brought changes to their valley. More families moved in, a small town grew up nearby, complete with a school and a church. Their ranch continued to prosper, and Thomas became a respected member of the community, known for his fairness and integrity. Grace's writing career flourished as well. She published 2 more books and became a regular contributor to several newspapers and magazines, writing about rural life, women's issues, and the changing West. She used her platform to advocate for women's suffrage and education, drawing on her own experiences. In 1903, Alina announced that she wanted to go to college to become a teacher. Grace and Thomas did not hesitate. "Of course you will go," Grace said. "We will find a way to make it work." "But it is expensive," Alina protested. "And I am a girl. Papa might need me here on the ranch." "I will always support your dreams, Alina," Thomas said firmly. "Your mother and I both believe in education, especially for women. If you want to teach, then you will teach." Alina threw her arms around her father's neck, crying with joy. "Thank you, Papa, thank you so much." As their children grew and eventually left home, creating lives of their own, Grace and Thomas found themselves alone together again, much as they had been in those early years. But now they had a lifetime of shared memories, of struggles overcome and joys celebrated. They were in their 50s now, Thomas's dark hair silvered at the temples, Grace's auburn showing threads of gray. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had met beside a broken stagecoach in the Nevada desert. "You remember the first thing I said to you?" Thomas asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset. "You said we looked like we had run into some trouble," Grace recalled with a smile. "And you looked at me like I might be trouble myself," Thomas said. "Can you blame me?" A lone cowboy appearing out of nowhere in the middle of the desert. "I suppose not," he admitted. "But I knew right away you were special. Something about the way you held yourself, the way you were trying to be brave even though you were scared." "I was terrified," Grace said. "And then you fixed the stagecoach, and I thought that was the end of it, that you would ride away and I would never see you again." "Best decision I ever made following that stage," Thomas said. "Changed my whole life." "Mine too," Grace said softly, leaning against his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "We have had a good life," Thomas said eventually. "The best," Grace agreed. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky we got." "It was not all luck," Thomas reminded her. "We worked hard. We chose each other every day. We built something real and lasting." "We did," Grace said, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." William came home for visits when he could, bringing with him his wife Sarah and eventually their children, Grace and Thomas's grandchildren. Eleanor became a beloved teacher in Sacramento, marrying a fellow teacher and raising 3 children of her own. Henry took over running the ranch, proving to be as skilled and dedicated as his father. Rose, the youngest, moved to San Francisco and became a nurse, caring for others with the same compassion her parents had always shown. Grace and Thomas watched their family grow and expand with joy, grateful for the legacy they were building. But their greatest happiness was still in each other, in the quiet moments they shared, the conversations that still ranged over everything and nothing, the touch of hands that still sent sparks through their veins. On their 40th wedding anniversary in December of 1921, their children threw them a large party at the ranch. The house overflowed with family and friends, 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and countless toasts to the couple who had built such a remarkable life together. At one point, William called for quiet and asked his parents to share the story of how they met one more time. Grace and Thomas looked at each other and smiled, then took turns recounting the tale, finishing each other's sentences as they had learned to do over 4 decades together. "And then he rode after the stagecoach," Grace said, her eyes shining. "Even though he had said he was looking for work in Carson City, he followed me west. Because I could not bear to say goodbye," Thomas said, taking her hand. "I had never believed in love at first sight until I met your grandmother, but from the moment I saw her, I knew my life had changed." "Did you really fix the stagecoach all by yourself, Grandpa?" one of the grandchildren asked. "I did," Thomas said. "Best repair job I ever did, because it bought me a few more days with your grandmother, and those days changed everything." Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Grace and Thomas lay in bed together, reflecting on the evening. 40 years, Grace marveled. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that we met, and other times it feels like I have known you my entire life." "I feel the same way," Thomas said. "But every single one of those years has been a gift, even the hard ones," Grace asked. "Especially the hard ones," Thomas said, "because we got through them together and they made us stronger." Grace turned to face him in the darkness, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you, Thomas Quinn. I have loved you since that day in the desert, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Grace Bellamy Quinn," he said, using her full married name like he only did on special occasions. "You took a drifting cowboy with nothing but a horse and some dreams and made him into something more. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." They kissed then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 40 years of love and commitment, of partnership and passion, of everything they had built together and everything they still hoped for. In the years that followed, they began to slow down. Thomas handed more and more of the ranch responsibilities to Henry, though he still liked to ride the property every day, checking on the cattle and horses. Grace continued writing, though she focused more on her memoirs now, wanting to leave a record of their life for their descendants. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1931, and though some family members suggested a large party again, Grace and Thomas requested something smaller. Just their immediate family, gathered at the ranch house, sharing a meal and memories. 50 years, Eleanor said, shaking her head in wonder. In a time when so many marriages end in divorce or unhappiness, you two have made it look easy. It was never easy, Grace said honestly, but it was always worth it. Your father and I worked at our marriage every single day, she continued, looking around at her children and grandchildren. We talked to each other, we listened, we compromised, we forgave, and most importantly, we never stopped choosing each other. Your mother is the smartest woman I have ever known, Thomas added, and listening to her has been the key to whatever success I have had in life. As the evening wore on and family members began to head home, Grace and Thomas found themselves alone on their porch once more, wrapped in blankets against the cool December air. "You remember what I said to you on our wedding night?" Grace asked. "You said loving me frightened you because now you had something to lose," Thomas recalled immediately. "I have spent 50 years being afraid of losing you," Grace admitted. "But I have also spent 50 years being grateful for every single day we have had together." "I am not going anywhere," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "Neither am I," Grace promised. They sat there together, watching the stars wheel overhead just as they had done thousands of times before. The valley stretched out before them, dark and peaceful, the ranch they had built humming with life even in the quiet night. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing softly, the sound carrying clear on the still air. "We did good, did we not?" Thomas said softly. "We did better than good," Grace replied. "We built something beautiful, a family, a home, a legacy, all from a chance meeting on a dusty road in Nevada." "Not chance," Thomas corrected gently. "Fate. Fate," Grace agreed with a smile. They remained on the porch until late into the night, reluctant to go inside, wanting to savor every moment together. Because after 50 years of marriage, they both understood the most important truth about love, that it was precious and fragile and had to be tended carefully, like a flame that could warm you forever if you never let it go out. Inside the house, the clock chimed midnight, marking the end of their anniversary day. But Grace and Thomas paid it no mind. They had learned long ago that love was not measured in days or years, but in moments, in the thousand small ways they showed each other care and commitment every single day. As they finally rose to go inside, Thomas paused at the door and looked back at the valley one last time. "Worth it," he said simply. "Every second," Grace agreed, taking his hand and leading him inside to the home they had built together, the life they had created, the love that had sustained them through half a century and would continue to sustain them for whatever time they had left. Thomas Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1933 at the age of 77. Grace was beside him, holding his hand, and his last words were, "I will find you again." Grace lived for 3 more years, continuing to write and spending time with her ever-growing family. She spoke often of Thomas, keeping his memory alive for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who continued to arrive. When she finally passed in the autumn of 1936, her children found her at her desk, pen still in hand, having just finished writing the final page of her memoirs. The last line read, "I was stranded when the stagecoach broke down, and a passing cowboy fixed it and followed me west. He fixed more than the stagecoach that day. He fixed my life, filling it with more love and joy than I had ever dreamed possible. If I had one wish, it would be to do it all again, exactly the same way." They buried Grace beside Thomas on a rise overlooking the valley, where they could watch over the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren continued to work the land, each generation adding their own stories to the family legacy, but never forgetting the love story that had started it all. The ranch remained in the Quinn family for generations, a testament to what 2 people could build when they chose to love each other every single day. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the valley, some swore they could still see two figures sitting on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching the sunset, together for all eternity as they had been in life. Their love story never truly ending but continuing on in the hearts and lives of everyone they had touched.